Welcome back to the Gracefully Wild Soul podcast. All right, we are returning with part 2 about Glastonbury and all of its magic. I just couldn't cut myself off from sharing all of the amazing things that I witnessed and experienced, and what I really just want to share with you if you ever consider traveling over to Glastonbury, or you're just thinking about traveling to another spiritual destination. All right, let's dive into part 2. Welcome to the Gracefully Wild Soul podcast. I'm Kirsten, a mother and soul guide, and this is a space where your soul is witnessed and the frequency of your heart is felt. Together, we will have intimate conversations about the essence of life, the beauty of your soul's path, and our evolution as women and as mothers. Through channeled words, lived experiences, and the wisdom of nature's rhythms, the soul, and the sacred feminine, this is where the gracefully wild woman begins to rise. We were speaking about water and the sacred waters that are present in Glastonbury, and specifically the red spring and the white spring. And I want to keep going directly from this place, because when you're physically in Glastonbury and you're physically at the chalice well in the white spring, you are close by and on the path to go up to the Tor. So the Tor, spelled T-O-R, is living on this incredible hill that resides over Glastonbury. So when you first drive into Glastonbury, this is the first thing you're going to see. You're going to see this large and beautifully manicured, in some ways, hill that has this labyrinth that has been able to be carved into the side of it. And on top of the hill, there is the Tor, which is also known as St. Michael's Tower. It is this roofless tower that sits on top of this hill. And so it's kind of this beacon of light that is really what feels like calling you into Glastonbury. And so when you're at the well and the spring, you are on the path to head to the Tor. And so you essentially walk on the path and you will work your way up through a pathway, and you begin to walk up the hill to journey up to the Tor. And so the Tor has such interesting energy. It's such an interesting experience. So as I mentioned, it is connected to St. Michael. So more specifically, St. Michael is known kind of as the warrior of light, or essentially the archangel that dispels evil and darkness. And so there's this very angelic energy that is present. And I feel that, and I felt that very much down and around the springs. So the springs actually run underneath the hill of the Tor, and they come out through these areas. So the Tor and the spring waters are connected. And so as you journey up this hill and you reach the top, you are almost in this new, very interesting energetic portal, or this new energetic vortex. And, from a very physical standpoint, you're high up on this hill and you can turn in this 360-degree view and see the land beneath you. And you can see for many, many miles. And as I mentioned before, Glastonbury is known as Avalon. And so if you look over this land, my understanding is they call this land below the flats. And so it looks more like farmland. But there are these waterways that run between this land. And so at one point, thousands of years ago, these flat areas were actually covered in water. So Avalon, or Glastonbury, was very much known as an island or an isle. And this whole area beneath the Tor was water. And so when you're up top and you're in the kind of St. Michael's Tower and you're looking around, you can feel the elements, the energy of each of the directions. I was super fortunate to find this incredible guide to take me to the Tor and some of these other places, as well as to the ancient stones in Avebury. And she asked me when we were up at the top of the Tor, sitting with St. Michael's Tower at our backs, what I saw, what I felt in this place. And what I described to her was essentially like the Tor, St. Michael's Tower, was almost like this sundial. So if you're familiar with a sundial, there is some sort of, tall mechanism in the middle, and then there's these points around it. And based on where the sun is up in the sky, it's going to cast a shadow, and it's going to be able to tell you the time or even the season. And that's very much what this energy felt like to me at the top of the Tor. I felt like I was in this portal of time, and you could walk in any direction. You could essentially, use the quantum field in a way that fit what your soul needed in that moment, working with energy and not looking at it in such a linear way, not putting it in a box, not, again, like time, coming back to time. We're so caught up in the structure of the clock, of the time. And when we open ourselves to the possibility that we always have more time, that time is available to us in any capacity, and it only requires us to take ourselves out of the box to work with it. And that's what it felt like up there. The winds were whipping, left and right. It was very strong and very dense, and it felt very directional. Like everything is happening all at the same time. And it was about a question. And when you walked into the tower, things calmed a bit. And the light, the fractions and the fractals of the light began to beam in different places. And this was like the quiet in the chaos, the beacon that all light resonates from. And so it was like a question in time of, where do you want to go? What do you want to do? What's the direction that your soul is ready to head? So when I was up there, that's very much what was happening for me. And again, its tower looks like a little mini castle that you would pick up and put on this hill. But something that came to me when I was there as well is, coming back to this divine feminine, divine masculine, speaking to my guide, and like my human guide, not my spirit guides. The guide that I had there, she was a priestess and a land guide, a shamanic practitioner, and she was magical. She was so amazing. And so anyways, when I was talking to her about, this energy and everything that was happening, she had mentioned that a lot of people view the Tor as that masculine element. So you could, again, use your intuition, use what feels good to you. You very much could look at the springs, both the white and the red springs, as these different elements of the divine feminine, right? The very primal aspect of the divine feminine with the red spring, and the very ethereal view of the white spring, the softness, softness and wildness matched together, coming to make and allow the divine feminine breathe in its most highest and purest form, and see the Tor, which is again this tower rising up on this land, as a beacon up to the sky as the masculine element here. So, she had offered that there were some of these different views of, how these energies and these places are portrayed. And so I had raised to her in response to this conversation that we were having, was based on some of the reading that I've done, some of the studies, that the tower was always very much a symbol of the divine feminine, and more specifically to the goddess Artemis and Mary Magdalene. And so there are, pieces of archaeological finds that demonstrate this consistent symbol of the tower. And so there is another perspective that's layered into this. Is this truly the crown jewel of the divine feminine, sitting over these waters, over these springs, protecting them, allowing them to be guided throughout Mother Earth, offering their healing, their source of power and love? So many layers just in this little bubble of a place here in Glastonbury. And this is all walkable. So like the little town of Glastonbury, you just walk around the corner, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 city blocks, and you're at the Chalice Garden, the Red Spring, the White Spring, and then you continue on to go up to the Tor. So this is all in this very condensed area. So that's kind of a bit of the energy that is emanating from Glastonbury and from these destinations. And as I mentioned before, Glastonbury as a whole is connected to a lot of ancient myth and lore, and has welcomed pilgrimages from all over the world for thousands of years. So in Glastonbury itself, so just again, then you reverse your corner, go back towards the main part of town, there are the Abbey grounds. So there was formerly an abbey located in Glastonbury, and it was a massive piece of grounds with a huge structure that housed these monks and this abbey. So they had, kind of their main hall, their main place of living in their quarters. They had their place of worship. They also had these massive kitchen structures, and they had gardens. If you go to the grounds now, I think that might be one of the more underrated places that I didn't appreciate before I had gone. And I'm so, so glad that I went to the Abbey and the grounds of the Abbey and walked them. It is massive, the amount of, space that was consumed by the monks in Glastonbury. So the Abbey grounds, rumoredly, are the final resting place of King Arthur and Queen Guinevere. And if you journey to the grounds and you're walking the grounds, you walk back and there's just remnants of these buildings, and you walk through what feels like this door or portal. Like, I don't know if you have watched any of the Lord of the Rings movies, but there's so much Lord of the Rings energy in Glastonbury. Yeah, that's a whole other conversation, but it feels like you're journeying through these massive doors into another world. And that's because the remnants of these buildings are towering over you. And you just have this deep sense of something living in the earth, like this higher power that's present all around you. And they're supposed to be the resting place of King Arthur and Queen Guinevere. And so there's a marking there that you can go visit and connect with. And they're all connected, okay? So all of these stories are deeply connected. They're not separate from one another. It just depends on maybe where you land. It depends on what resonates with you. But from the outside, you could say, oh, Glastonbury is this spiritual destination. It has all these tarot cards and it has goddesses and paganism and all these different elements. And then there's like this strange connection to Christianity or Christ and Mary. And that's so weird. Like, how do these two things exist? Oh my gosh, so much there. Well, let's just stay focused on the story here, and then we'll kind of weave into how really these two are very connected. But on these grounds, there is also a connection to Joseph of Arimathea, I believe is how you say it. And there's different understandings of who Joseph is based on biblical texts and other texts. But the rumor on the street is Joseph was the uncle of Jesus, and that Joseph was part of the quest for and protection of the Holy Grail. And so that connects back to King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, who were supposed to be the knights that protected and kept a secret the Holy Grail. Now, maybe you're familiar with some of this terminology. Maybe you've seen the Da Vinci Code. Maybe you've read the book. Maybe even you've watched Indiana Jones. You guys, these myths, these stories are deeply seeped into modern life if you just bring them back and connect them all together. So what is the Holy Grail? Well, different perspectives, different connections, and different beliefs. The probably most prominent one that is out in kind of modern living is the Holy Grail is the chalice, or essentially like a wine vessel, wine cup, that was part of the Last Supper and is ultimately connected back to the crucifixion of Jesus. So there's a lot of layers in there that I'm not even going to dissect, but just on a very basic level, there is one view that the Holy Grail is a physical chalice cup that's connected to Christ. Now, if you dive a bit more into different texts and different viewpoints and even different archaeological finds, there is a vastly different view of what the Holy Grail is. And the opposite side of the coin, the other discussion that is happening around the Holy Grail is that the Holy Grail is the child of Mary and Jesus, and that the protection was the protection of that child in order to protect their bloodline. And so I'm not even going to go into that deep conversation because that's a whole other episode, but I just want to bring that in because this is how these two things come together. There are different views, there are different perspectives, there are different connections to these stories about how King Arthur is connected to Avalon and the Knights of Templar, the Knights of the Round Table, and how their quest and protection of the Holy Grail was so important and how they came to be in Glastonbury. Joseph, again, was meant to have been connected directly to this quest, to this protection of the Holy Grail. And he journeyed from Egypt to this land, planted this holly thorn, which blooms twice a year, and so many stories with that too. And that his connection to this land was in order to carry forward the voice, the message of Jesus, and start the Christian church over in what now we know as being England. And so again, these stories live maybe in some aspects separately, but they very much are interconnected. And if you bring all of these things together, if you bridge this information and this knowledge together and your beliefs and decide for yourself what feels right, then there is this incredible tapestry to Glastonbury and the magic that it holds. If you heard me speak to the Red Spring in the last episode, I very much touched upon Mary Magdalene and the energy and her presence in the chalice well and in the gardens, and her connection very much to Yeshua, Jesus, whatever word and name you would like to use, and their divine relationship, their sacred love, the divine feminine and the divine masculine coming together. And so you bring those elements together and you look at the quest and the protection of the Holy Grail. Do you believe it's a cup? Or do you believe it is related to the womb, the seat where sacred water lives, the true chalice of all life, which ultimately carries forward a child? So much happening there. And I'm just giving you a little taste of, what I have gathered and what I feel connected to, and the messages that came through and the connections that happened for me there. And this is all present in the land. You see it, you feel it. All of it is there in Glastonbury. So that's really this kind of interwoven experience of all of these elements coming together. And you might even ask yourself, well, okay, how do we reconcile this idea of Christianity with paganism, with nature-based spirituality, these practices, right? And that dives us into a deeper conversation. So earth-based practices have been around for many more thousands of years before monotheism existed in the form that we know it. And so these nature-based practices, the connection to goddesses and the elements and the directions all live in Glastonbury. They are living and breathing. There are these beautiful goddess temples, and everywhere that you go, like you turn around and you look at a tree and there's this little offering, like a little crystal, a little flower that's been placed there, or people tie little ribbons, like a wishing ribbon on a tree. And it's just these subtle reminders that we are so connected to each other, that we are connected to Earth, and that when we work together, when we honor each other, we find this beautiful rhythm and this synergy between us. And so when I was in Glastonbury, I felt so rewarded by this experience to see that there is this place, not only like literally on this earth and like, but there is this spiritual place to expand into these practices and into these beliefs in the bigger world, into the broader world. Because, you think about it and you distill all these holidays, quote unquote holidays that we have. You have kids, you know what I'm talking about, like these holidays that are either they have a break or they don't have a break, or they're even celebrated at school. So much of them are, focused on religious practices. Again, absolutely fine. But there hasn't been the same space created for this connection to earth-based practices, to the elements, to nature, to goddesses, right? These goddesses are archetypes of the energy that lives within us, that ultimately is manifested on the outside of us. And so it just felt so rewarding and validating to be in a place that had all of these things, that saw life differently. And that was in every storefront. That was in every sacred space, at the White Spring, at the Red Spring, at the Tor, just in these parks. They're different places. The trees have these wishing ribbons. Again, shrines, altars, offerings, it's everywhere. And so it just was such it was an interesting experience to see this grand scale of the Abbey and kind of the connection to Jesus and the Bible and all of these other stories. and seeing it next to spirituality and goddesses and the way of nature. And so, kind of again, looking at the two of these together, so much of the practices that have been carried forward, at least in certain Christian practices, do originate from these earth-based practices. They do originate from the wheel of the year. So the spring equinox, which was happening when I was in Glastonbury, this is the time in which light and dark are equal, was always a marker, was always a point in time. It was the calendar, way before the calendar that we know as today, the Gregorian calendar. And this was the time in which things would be marked following that time, the full moon following that, and then the placement of a celebration like Easter after that. So all of these different earth-based practices do live side by side. There was this church that we walked by, and the yew tree is a holy tree in Celtic tradition. And I don't know the exact energy of the yew tree. It's spelled Y-E-W. And this tree had been there for thousands of years, and it was massive. And it's still considered sacred and holy. There was a church built right next to it. Let me tell you, the church isn't thousands of years old. The tree is, but the church isn't. And so these two things do exist side by side there in the Glastonbury area. And I do think that in this area, there is much more of this honoring, this fluid conversation that's happening back and forth between these worlds, where back here in the United States, again, a very young, country in terms of its existence, we're not having those side by side conversations. We're not having this fluid back and forth of honoring of different practices in the same way, even if some of the practices are borrowing from other practices, or just, it's not happening. And so it was just really interesting to witness, like in the physical form, like again, seeing this, tree and this, church next to each other. And then also seeing these spaces like the Abbey, which has part of these healing waters where people would be on a pilgrimage to the holy water in the Abbey. And you leave this space, you leave this, kind of massive area that consumes the Abbey grounds, and you go over to the Chalice Well, and there's a very different, kind of healing energy that's happening there. But they complement each other in this very interesting way. So this was the land of Glastonbury. This is the land of Avalon, and it is very much rooted in myth, and it is connected to so many mysteries. It has this very potent healing energy, and you really do feel all of these different frequencies happening at the same time. The divine feminine, the divine masculine. You feel this underworld, the middle world, the upper world. It's all happening in this place. And so if you decide that you're ever going to journey there, I would just encourage you to root into the connection before you journey there and see what's coming up for you. Like, just feel into what you're being drawn to in this area. And you will naturally explore all of these things, but deciding for yourself before you come to this land, what is calling to you, what feels right in your bones, is part of the medicine of this place, because it has everything to offer you. It has every perspective, every bit of, mystery, myth, lore, religion, spirituality, whatever it is that you want to take from this place and channel it out into the world, which is really the energy of that heart chakra. It sits and lives in Glastonbury. And yeah, I'm so fortunate and grateful to have been able to have journeyed there. And I hope to go back again sometime in the future. But before we leave each other, I actually wanted to pull a card for you. I bought this deck when I was over there, and it is the Mists of Avalon Oracle deck. And so, as I mentioned before, Glastonbury is known as Avalon. And if you have any familiar with the text of the Mists of Avalon, which was a book and ultimately made into a movie, you might be a little familiar with what I'm speaking to. But let's pull a card for everyone and just see what Glastonbury energy is coming forward for you and for me. All right, let's see. Shuffling the cards a little bit here. Oh, okay. Pulling a card. Let's see. So the card has the number 28. And the words that are on this card are confidence, respect, self-esteem, opportunity. And when I look at this card, there is also this beautiful fairy goddess that I'm not familiar. It says Nimue, Nimue, but she's holding the light in her hands. She has this very flower crown adorning her head, her long red hair, and she's sitting in front of a tree where there is an offering. Incense is burning. The spirals of life are living in this tree. In fact, there's this beautiful little face that's snuck into the bark of the tree. And remember those ribbons and those offerings I spoke to? This tree is carrying these ribbons hanging off its branches. And so just taking the energy of this card, knowing that there is confidence, respect, self-esteem, and opportunity always available to you. It sits in your hands. It sits in your heart. Just allow yourself to see it. Allow yourself to feel it. So that's my intuitive guidance from the card. I'm going to just grab the booklet here and see if it has a little extra yumminess. And it says, you are beholding magic and its essence. It says, divine timing is all around you. Everything in our world is commanded by time in one way or another. Seeing the window of opportunity and the opportune time to stake your claim, make a move, create something new. Don't hesitate or procrastinate. Time is of the essence. Use your magic to create a new reality. The time is now. Well, look at that. The word time. And I think that the message here is that you are the creator of your own time. You are the ultimate creatrix of what you want to bring into the world. And this card reaffirms that. So I hope you enjoyed the episode, kind of diving into the nooks and cranny of Glastonbury. But I'm sure I'll come back with more at some point because there really is so much more. In fact, I didn't even get to touch on Avebury, the ancient stones that are outside of Glastonbury. So maybe that will be the next share. All right, I look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Bye. Welcome to the Gracefully Wild Soul podcast. I'm Kirsten, a mother and soul guide, and this is a space where your soul is witnessed and the frequency of your heart is felt. Together, we will have intimate conversations about the essence of life, the beauty of your soul's path, and our evolution as women and as mothers. Through channeled words, lived experiences, and the wisdom of nature's rhythms, the soul, and the sacred feminine, this is where the gracefully wild woman begins to rise.